Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to all of you who have joined us today as we examine more closely South Africa's journey of reconciliation and social cohesion over the past 30 years. This webinar serves as part of the program of action for this year's Anti-Racism Week. Anti-Racism Week annually takes place between the 14th and the 21st of March. This action week really aims to create public awareness about racism and its effects on individuals and broader society. It's about ensuring that there's a countrywide focus on tackling racism and that it remains on the national agenda. This year's Anti-Racism Week theme is Learn, Speak, Act, Combating Racism Together. And this theme reflects a call to action for South Africans to learn about racism, speak out against it, and take action whenever and wherever we encounter instances of racism and discrimination. Thank you to all our different speakers for joining us today as we aim to look at the challenges that South Africa has faced in its journey of reconciliation and social cohesion. So without wasting any time, I'd like to introduce our first speaker for the event, Professor Achille Mbembe, who will provide an input on the current state of racism in South Africa and across the world. Professor Mbembe is a research professor of history and politics at the Wits Institute for Social and Economic Research. He's also the director of the Innovation Foundation for Democracy and was educated in Cameroon and France, where he obtained his PhD in history at the Sorbonne in Paris in 1989 and a diploma in advanced studies in political sciences, Po Paris. Mbembe has taught at various universities in the United States, including Columbia University, the University of Pennsylvania, University of California at Berkeley, and at Irvine, Yale University, Duke University, and Harvard University. He was recently awarded the Holberg Prize for 2024, one of the largest international prizes awarded annually to an outstanding researcher in the humanities, social sciences, law, or theology. He is also a winner of the Ernst Bloch Award and the Gerda Henkel Prize, and is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and a fellow of the British Academy. Mbembe also holds honorary doctorates from Paris University, the Catholic University of Louvain, and the University of Bergen. Thank you so much to Professor Mbembe for joining us. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Bile, and thank you all. I was asked to introduce our conversation this afternoon in 20 minutes. So I will try to stick with that. I have been reading of late the Reconciliation Barometer for 2023. And it seems to me that there are 5 key lessons we can take from that comprehensive study. The study recognizes that we in South Africa are not at all in a bad place when it comes to the project of reconciliation. But we are still facing a number of key obstacles, most of which call for particular 5 key obstacles. The first one has to do with politics, in the sense that there is a growing distrust in political leadership, limited confidence in public institutions, and widespread concern over corruption. This in itself represents a major obstacle to the project of reconciliation. The barometer goes further and lists a number of other obstacles, key among which is the violence met at in our society. They bear a disproportionate impact when it comes to questions of poverty and economic inequality. Very interesting in the barometer are the findings which concern the whole area of collective memory, by which I mean all that has to do with the legacy of apartheid, in which collective memory, in which central to reconciliation was the whole idea of truth, the truth about the history of the country and what happened here not so long ago. The report shows that, in fact, there are very low levels of knowledge about the past, especially among young people, which raises, of course, the whole issue of the transmission, intergenerational transmission of memory when it comes precisely to what all of this goes hand in hand with very serious gaps in history education and in the curriculum in our schools. It seems to me that this is a key area if we want to push forward the agenda of reconciliation. We definitely have to pay closer attention to this area. Another contentious domain, which comes quite strongly in the barometer, concerns, of course, all that has to do with reparation, restitution, and memorialization. In fact, the barometer shows that there is a substantive support when it comes to the project of reconciliation, but that we are rather divided when it comes to deciding whether reconciliation means restitution, whether it means reparation, and when it comes to questions of memorialization. So that's another area. The last key area has to do, of course, with the dramatic issue of inequality, in particular, economic inequality. So those key 5 areas appear very clearly as priorities when it comes to devising a strategy to combat, to end structural racism in South Africa. Now, let me make some comments as to where do we stand today when it comes to the global fight against racism, global effort in ending structural racism. Here, it seems to me that the main impetus is still coming from the US, the United States of American experience. Let me just say that in our modern history, the modern history of our world, there have been 3 main centers of production and development of structural forms of racism. 3 historical centers. One, of course, was the United States. The other one was Brazil. And the third key major historical center where racism prevailed in, structural racism prevailed in modern times was South Africa. We have to add to these 3 key centers, of course, the experience in the Caribbean, and to a large extent, the experience in Europe and in places such as Australia. Now, in spite of the fact that we have had these 3 key centers of where state racism and structural racism has been historically produced, it happens that the US experience has dominated most of our understanding of what racism is all about, in particular anti-Black racism, and it has dominated a huge, to a large extent, our understanding of how it is that we have to mobilize ourselves in order to bring racism to an end. And this is still the case today, which means that we certainly in South Africa need to invest a bit more in research and intellectual discourse in order to highlight what it is that from our historical experience we bring to the global debate on racism and the ways to bring it to an end, to highlight what our experience has been and to highlight its significance in the global arena. Because it's not true that we haven't done much here. We have done a lot. And in fact, over the last quarter of the 20th century, South Africa has been a model of how it is that we begin to try to address the question of the difficult relationship between democracy on the one hand and racism on the other. So, of course, we have in South Africa ongoing debates between younger people who believe that all that happened, which led to 1994, is meaningless because somewhat apartheid has survived beyond its formal abolition in law. We do have that. But I don't think that the experience that was went on here in the 90s, which led to the end of apartheid and the advent of democracy, and that experience is very meaningful in the fractious world we live in today. The choices that were made here speak still to the world as we see it developing right now. Just witness what's going on in Israel and Gaza, or the reception, the case in The Hague, fostered by our government, the reception it has had in many, many quarters. I was in Brazil 2 weeks ago, and I could see how it is that what happened here 30 years ago is still meaningful to many in the world. Now, all of this having been said, it seems to me, and this is really worth highlighting, that a key trend we are witnessing right now has to do with a kind of incipient convergence of two forms of struggles. On the one hand, the struggle to end structural racism, and on the other hand, the struggle to save the planet. What I mean by that is that increasingly, we see a convergence between matters of anti-racism and matters having to do with the sustainability of life on Earth, matters, if you want, environmental and ecological. This opens up a whole set of avenues and possible coalitions and alliances between those who are very deeply concerned with the future of our planet and the questions of durability and sustainability of life on Earth. That's the first point. The second point, when it comes to where things are globally, the second point is of course, the persistence of the U.S. paradigm on these matters. And as we fight against structural racism is predicated on the belief that there is a war going on in the U.S. against Black people. I did sense the same in Brazil, where many also do believe that in Brazil there's a war on Black people that has been going on over many, many centuries and is far from ending. There's a war in the sense that the killing of Black people seems to be coming more and more of a commonplace. A war in the sense that many activists believe that bent upon the ultimate destruction of Black people, if only because it is gradually becoming tolerable. So that's, if you want, that's the sentiment. It's a very deep sentiment ingrained in many activists' minds. It is a discourse you also hear a lot among academics, researchers, and this idea of a war going on against Black people determines, therefore, the many different strategies activists in these parts of the world imagine the way in which we could end racism. Now, we have seen this, of course, emerge and take shape, especially with Black Lives Matter. But I have to add then quickly that, in fact, what Black Lives Matters, what the BLM offers is a set of propositions, some of which we might want to examine in our context. And once again, our context is not really the US context. The US context is probably a bit closer to the Brazil, a number of specificities one always has to take into account. Now, so the new forms of struggles against structural racism take at least five modalities. The first one aims at bringing to an end the vulnerability to poverty, all kinds of vulnerabilities, vulnerability to poverty, vulnerability to prison, and to premature death. The three P's: poverty, prison, and premature death. So you have seen over the last decade a number of strategies being developed around that overall goal of bringing to an end the vulnerability of Black people in relation to these objective constraints. The second domain of struggle has had to do with the demilitarization of the police. The police has been absolutely central to the fight against racism in places such as America, but also a lot, in fact, increasingly in places such as Brazil, or even more so in Europe recently, because the war against Blacks, which I have been talking about, many believe that it's first and foremost a spatial war, a spatial space, a territorial war, with police identifying constantly who belongs where and who is out of place, to the point where what passes for peace is in fact part of the everyday attempt at evicting blacks from places many believe they shouldn't belong to. So the police has been a key object of the strategies that have been put in place to bring racism to an end. Bail, the decriminalization of drugs, and the divesting from prisons, divestment from prisons going hand in hand with divestment from an economy based on fossil fuels in particular. What is the overall goal of all of this? The overall goal has been to save resources which can then be invested in domains such as education, universal health care, housing, living wage jobs, food justice, green energy. In any case, social investments with an emphasis on community control and participation, community control in particular over police, over schools, with an emphasis too on support for community-based organizations. All of this in order to foster the capacity to meet basic human needs, the capacity of people indeed to have access to the means of daily existence. And therefore, this project of meeting basic human needs, eliminating poverty, ensuring economic security for all, have been perceived and are perceived as I speak, indeed as the material basis for the kind of life of dignity for all. The end of racism is supposed to usher us all in. So it seems to me that that is the landscape. Of course, it takes many different shapes depending on where we are and the history of the places where we live. But this convergence of struggles for racial equality and dignity, and the struggles for saving the planet, it seems to me that this convergence will probably be the dimension I think I have stuck with the 20-minute rotability. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Mbembe. I think you have been able to help us identify the ways that South Africa has done incredibly well in their journey of reconciliation, but have also helped us identify ways in which South Africa is able to improve its strategy and research focal points to enhance the kind of strategies we have currently in dealing with issues of reconciliation and social cohesion. And I think even in identifying that we need to be clear about what we mean when we speak of reconciliation, it's an important statement that I'm hoping that we'll be able to delve into further in the next part of our program. I'd just like to welcome my colleague, Kawela, who is the Education and Training Officer in the Foundation's Youth Activism Program. He will be joined by two colleagues, Sihle Boy from the South African Human Rights Commission and Ms. Kate Lefko-Everett from the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Just to confirm with Ritabile, am I audible? Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kate. Good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon to all the participants who are joining us today. As was introduced by Ritabile, my name is Mweketsi Kwahela, and I'm the Education and Training Officer of the Youth Activism Program here at the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. And I have been to essentially lead this panel discussion where we'll be joined by the South African Human Rights Commission, a representative there, and then also a representative from the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, and then also a representative from the Center for the Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy. And in essence, colleagues, the title of this panel discussion will really be about, the 1994 Reconciliation Project, exploring racial tensions and democracy in post-July unrest South Africa. And essentially, really, part of this panel discussion, what we'll also be doing is that we'll be unpacking two reports, right? We'll be unpacking the South African Reconciliation Barometer, and then also the July unrest report that was released, of course, by the South African Human Rights Commission in partnership with the Cultural, Religious, and Linguistic Rights Commission. But before I get into, substantive matters of the reports, I do like to introduce, my co-facilitators who I'll be leading the discussion with, Sihle Boy and Kate Lefko-Everett. I will start with Sihle and then swiftly move on to Kate. So Sihle Boy is a research assistant of the Equality Focal Group at the South African Human Rights Commission, a 29-year-old African woman who is passionate about human rights advocacy with a special interest in the substantive realization of the right to equality for vulnerable and marginalized groups. Though at the core of her passion is the protection of equality for children in basic education through learner-centered quality teaching and the transformation of laws and policies, Sihle is also strongly passionate about equitable protection of minorities within minorities and of vulnerable groups within vulnerable groups. She's a driven double major graduate of Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy and History from the University of Fort Hare, an LLB PG DIP in Law LLM, and a PGC graduate from the University of the Witwatersrand. She's also a PhD candidate at the Wits Law School to further research and effectively contribute to the human rights and equality discourse. And in essence, what she hopes to do is to be determined to use education to actively contribute to the progressive transformation of laws and policies in ways that help realize substantive equality for all. Sihle is also the advisor, she's the advisor to, the advisor at the Human Rights Commission. But then also, she's also a research advisor for the Equality Focal Area and a shine champion at the South African Human Rights Commission. So thank you for joining us, Sihle. And then also just to swiftly move on and introduce our second panelist, Kate Lefko-Everett. Kate is a senior researcher and has worked with the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation since 2009, developing and managing the South African Reconciliation Barometer, as well as peer projects, including in Rwanda and Sri Lanka. Kate specializes in applied research, social cohesion, good governance, and monitoring and evaluation. But also, colleagues, it is important to note that Kate has published widely, including in the popular press, contributions to edited volumes, including The State of the Nation 2014, that was published by the Human Science Research Council, and in peer-reviewed journals. Some of her recent articles include Leaving It to the Children, Non-Racialism, Identity, Socialization, and Generational Change in South Africa, which was a book chapter that was published by the London and New York-based Roulette in 2014, and also beyond race, exploring indicators of disadvantage to achieve South African equity goals, which was an article published in Transformation. She also has a BA from Vassar College, New York, USA, and a master's in applied social research from Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland. Welcome, Kate, and welcome, Sihle. Colleagues, in really just unpacking this panel, and like I said earlier on in my introduction, what I'm going to do, when I was really tasked with this mission, instead of just separating the two reports, and also for me, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to think through them, both, right? So I'm going to transition between the two. So I just want to lay that context so that, you follow me, right? And also when I engage with both Kate and Sihle, some of the questions and provocations that I really am going to ask them, will both highlight both reports, both the July unrest report, but then also the SARB report that was, of course, Kate was responsible for. And I don't want to think of them as separate, because I do think there are common themes and commonalities that come out, right? And I hope that, you'll be able to follow me. For example, when I started thinking about really the July unrest report, Kate and Sihle, I began to think about the book that was published by Kanita Hunter, Kavil Singh, and Jeff Wicks from News 24. And it is this book called 8 Days in July. And many people, between those 8 days, which was the 9 and 18 July, we know that there was a civil unrest across the country, right? And report says, approximately 350 people were killed. It was named the July unrest or July riots, that period. And it really marked one of the bloodiest and most violent episodes in post-apartheid South Africa. And I think also what the South African Reconciliation Barometer also does when you read it is that it's also looking at, what are the relations among us as Black people, colored people, Indian people, right, white people, which are apartheid racial categories, right, in post-apartheid South Africa. And also, we know that the July riots, for example, were concentrated predominantly in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, and that there was, widespread unrest also across the country. And of course, 2 official reports, as I indicated, have been released on the unrest, one by the South African Human Rights Commission and the other by the Cultural, Religious, and Linguistic Rights Commission. And as I was going through the reports and reading through them, for me, what I found is that, both reports certainly do well in documenting a chronology of events, but a critique of them really that I found was, there was a sense of failure to get to the core of people's motivations and experiences during this time, right? And in my own analysis, I found that there was a heavy focus on, infrastructure damage and economic loss. Of course, also, that overshadows the impact of violence, which, led to the death of hundreds and arrest and injury of many more. And my second critique really of the reports is that, for me, I found that there was also a failure to center narratives of those involved at a ground level in the organization, coordination, and execution of those protests. And really, part of what I also want to do in this discussion, just collaboratively leading this facilitation, is that I really also want us to center the narratives of those who were involved, but then also those who were affected, right? Because I think also what the South African Reconciliation Barometer does so beautifully, is that it captures people's narratives, people's everyday lived experiences of what does it mean to be a Black person in 2024 South Africa, as an example. What does it mean to be a white person in 2024 South Africa? What does it mean to be an Indian person in 2024 South Africa? What does it mean to be a colored person in 2024 South Africa? And again, how do these lived experiences of being white, Black, Indian, Asian, colored influence us in terms of, my political culture, inclusion, apartheid legacy, racial reconciliation, social cohesion, perceptions of change? And colleagues, again, I'm just laying down this context for us because, again, these are some of the provocations that in this panel that I want us to really think through and think about. And perhaps, Kate, let me start with you in terms of the work that you led with regards to the South African Reconciliation Barometer. And just, if you can then perhaps, Professor Mbembe, closed off by talking about reconciliation and the meaning of reconciliation. In the report, the South African Reconciliation Barometer report, what the report beautifully does is to define things like reconciliation, what it means to the people that you interviewed and so on. But perhaps because then Professor Mbembe also talked about the experiences in Brazil, but then also in the United States, I just wanted to find out from you, Kate, what lessons can really be learned from other countries in terms of their experiences with reconciliation processes, and perhaps how might they be applied to the South African context in relation to the work that you've done with the South African Reconciliation Barometer. Kate?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me and for the invitation. Can you all hear me okay? My internet connection isn't great, so if you lose me, then I will turn the video off, but I guess it's nice to see people's face to some extent as well. So yeah, in response to your question, the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, we are a non-governmental organization based in Cape Town, but working in multiple countries in Africa and throughout South Africa as well. We have been conducting the Reconciliation Barometer survey since 2003. So I appreciate the engagement with the report. And if there are people interested who haven't accessed it, it's available online on our website. And as you mentioned, we have defined reconciliation in terms of 6 main dimensions that we use in terms of operationalizing that into measurement. And those dimensions, as has been alluded to by Professor Mbembe and in your intro as well, are in the areas of political culture, inclusion, social cohesion, racial reconciliation, our understanding of apartheid and the legacy of apartheid, and perceptions of change in South Africa. I think, one of the the strengths of any kind of, or rather the weaknesses of any kind of survey of this kind. It's a quantitative survey. We don't have a lot of data and questions that allow people to talk about their experiences in a qualitative way. And, that kind of is a response to some of your comments about the motivation and the unrest. But there are other strengths, of course. And one of those is that this is a very long serving data set. We now have 20 years of data on a very unique and important time in South Africa's history. We also try to make that data as widely available as possible. The data sets are available through UCT and the Data First Center for others who want to engage. And we, in fact, encourage as many people as possible to make use of that data. And we periodically do validate and review the questions themselves through more qualitative exercises to understand that we are, in fact, reflecting and representing how South Africans understand experience of reconciliation. I would probably stop short at necessarily talking about other countries' experiences, but what we have found, because this project has attracted interest and has been kind of replicated and developed as a tool in other countries. As you mentioned, we've worked on a barometer in Rwanda. We are busy with one in Sri Lanka. And I think there's one in Australia, Canada, Colombia. So it's a very useful tool, but it is also unique in that reconciliation, as we've seen in South Africa, is very much defined by the local experience to some extent, the local institutions. And in South Africa, some of the questions that we've looked at are, for example, about prosecutions of perpetrators, memorialization, race relations, and things like that. So our approach has been to look at those issues and look at the theory, but also when we're working with in other contexts, understand that there's different transitional processes that have happened there, and to try to learn in each unique context and experience that we're working in. I'll stop there, so I don't want to take up too much time.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Kate, for that. Sihle, I mean, you know, in terms of the findings of the report that was produced by colleagues in your space, you know, the South African Human Rights Commission and, you know, the CRL Rights Commission reports, I'm interested to find out from you, you know, in terms of these reports, how do they inform our understanding of racial dynamics and social inequality in South Africa?
Thank you so much, Wiketsi, and good afternoon to everyone. In terms of the Commission's findings, and specifically as they relate to the racial tensions, it was realized that South Africans in general still harbor racial biases. And there has not been a space created for them to express how they actually feel about racism since the democratic dispensation. So what we realized was done was that we, amongst other band-aids, we have been using the tolerance band-aid, right, to keep these biases and these internalized feelings and oppressions and views inside, right? And what we see happening right now is that band-aid is actually tearing, and the racial tensions are at the brink of eruption, because what we have focused on as a country is abolishing apartheid, right? Without realizing that racism predates apartheid. It accentuated, it actually defined, and it intensified the racial divisions and inequalities, right? But all these racial inequalities predated it. And people did not experience racism from written laws. They experienced it from the people who implemented the laws. Those are also written by people. And our emphasis is always on the structural racism, which then directs our focus on the systems, But we forget that the systems are built by people, and the real change needs to happen with the people who make the laws, right? And the people that the laws govern. That did not happen, but we were given tolerance, which did not change our internal attitudes. And what tolerance does is that, in fact, tolerance is a ceiling. So we can tolerate each other until something that triggers what we really feel happens. That's what happened in July. During the hearings, the people of Phoenix kept referring to the incident of 1949 and 1985, the Inanda riots in 1985, and the Cato Manor riots as well in 1949. And so they kept referring to them as if this is a history, and there's from that history that had been passed on through generations. As much as there's now a street dividing the Indian community from the Black community in Phoenix, it's just a street. I mean, they can cross over if they wanted to, but their internalized racism exists. So they're still far apart from each other. They still don't know or understand each other. So they mistrust each other. They don't trust each other. And this is another blind spot of our democratic dispensation, that the focus has always been on Black and white, leaving the colored and Indian as a missing needle,
Mhm.
right? So it's as if we keep saying blacks and whites, the perpetrator is white, but we did not think of the of the racism that occurred within the whole non-white community, right? So we haven't had enough time, or we haven't invested enough to look at the interpersonal, right? I mean, there's the structural, there are the laws, but there's the interpersonal division, which comes from the colonial racial hierarchies that is still in existence in South Africa. And as much as we don't say it out loud, it does exist. People see it. And that's why when there is when we protest against economic issues, right, or strife, we will talk about white capital monopoly. We're fighting a race. There's always a race included. And not that it shouldn't be that way. I'm just saying the fact that we ignore that people feel and experience it still, even though we have equality laws and everything else, we see it in our time of distress, that these tensions really exist, right? And we also realize that as much as we do need the law to foster, it does foster tolerance so that people don't just act anyhow in terms of how they feel. But people now are governed by fear of punishment. They're not racist anymore. They are scared of being punished for acting on it, right? So when people are in a fit of rage and they're not rationalizing their actions, or when they believe that no one is watching, they become the very thing that the laws are trying to fight. Because it's not the change in the people, but it is the fear of being punished.
Yeah.
And also what our reconciliation process has failed to do is creating a space that allows an honest conversation to happen amongst all these racial groups that exist, to allow the perpetrator to say exactly how they feel about the victim, and the victim how exactly they feel about the perpetrator and about themselves.
Yeah.
Because for us to get to the understanding that will eventually modify or transform our attitudes, these truths need to be said.
Yeah.
Without us okay, thank you. I think I'm going over time. All right.
No. But I think so. Before perhaps I continue, just a plea to the colleagues who are joining us to please mute yourself, colleagues, by all means, so that we can be able to hear the speakers who are on platform. But Sihle, perhaps to connect what you are saying in terms of what you found in terms of the report, in terms of racial biases, interpersonal division, internal attitudes, but then also the link that you make, to say that oftentimes in this country, whenever we talk about racial issues, it almost feels like, black versus white versus black, and you're proposing to us this missing middle, so to say, in terms of colored and Indian people, in terms of where they are. Kate, to connect what Sihle was saying to, for example, what was interesting for me when I was going through the barometer was particularly the aspect across, relationships across racial lines. And really just what I found interesting to note here is how, for example, as I was looking through the graphs that you had provided according to racial categories, what I found interesting is how, I don't know, Africans of Black South Africans, for example, from the moment that you started doing the barometer, what I found interesting is that it almost feels like, Black South Africans, for example, are the ones who had to frequently, interact with people of different races. And I just wanted to find out, I don't know, as a researcher, why do you think that is? But also, I'm asking this in light of just even what the South African Reconciliation Barometer highlights in terms of, some of the obstacles to reconciliation that you highlight in terms of poverty, inequality, racism, and corruption. And perhaps the point that I'm trying to make is, despite these obstacles that you highlight for us, right, and also some of the aspects that have been highlighted by Professor Mbembe, and even what Sihle is saying in terms of the attitudes and so on. I don't know, like as a researcher working on this barometer, you know, for you as you went home or as you were reading the data, analyzing the data vigorously in terms of the methodology, you know, what I don't know, what went through your mind in terms of, you know, relationships across racial divides, you know, and why is it that in you know, with some racial categories, for example, you know, you see a jump and then you see, you know, a reduction, a jump reduction, but then with African people or Black South Africans, you know, it almost like there's an upward trajectory. Yeah, Kate?
Sure. Thank you. I mean, it's an interesting question. As you mentioned in the report, we have had those survey questions since the earliest rounds about the extent that people build relationships across apartheid-defined racial lines. And we have looked at different types of relationships, including the extent that people interact across race lines on a daily basis, and the extent that you have socialization. And I think that also alludes to what Cecil is mentioning in her input as well, about the extent that what occurs in your private spaces, and when you're frustrated or you feel in your safe space, and that's where those attitudes continue to fester. I mean, one of the answers that we have found in terms of the level of interaction and contact is that in this country, which continues to be untransformed in many ways, the lack of transformation in educational institutions, in residential communities, in even access to the formal workplace is, you know, where many of us might have that type of day-to-day interaction with people that are outside our most intimate circles. And some, you know, and in some of the work that you mentioned in the beginning, I've also talked about the issues that we've had with this, tracing this back to kind of contact theory and whether that is how much credibility we give that. But that was kind of some of the thinking that was behind the original design of the survey. And certainly my feeling is that is not enough to deal with the issues of endemic racism that we still have in the country. But we do continue to track that level of contact and socialization. And I think also at a larger picture in terms of the survey as a whole, I mean, it's very interesting to see the trends that we've seen year on year. I would say the issue of social relationships developing and evolving over these 30 years of democracy is one where we have had moderate levels of progress and moderate reconciliation. And, you know, we have seen some really positive findings, as were alluded to at the beginning. There is still a very strong shared national identity. People are committed still to the idea of reconciliation and national unity, but where you start to see some of the differences come in are around the practicalities of how that should happen. And when we look into the questions about how people answer on restitution, for example, land reform, those are some of the questions where you really get notable differences in the way people respond depending on their race. For me, as a last input, I mean, one of the really concerning things in this year's barometer is around the low levels of trust in institutions and leadership. And those are potentially destabilizing for the country. People are distrustful of one another. They're distrustful of the people who are in politics and in power. And combined with the level of economic inequality that we continue to have in the country, my feeling is those continue to be destabilizing factors that have consequences for social cohesion, consequences for reconciliation. And there are also areas where you see a lot of consistency throughout the country, and all different kinds of people and respondents are in relative agreement on some of those items.
Thank you so much, Kate. And perhaps also being considerate of time, Sihle, to link with what Kate talked about in terms of the South African Reconciliation Barometer and the findings specifically around, you know, people's trust in institutions, you know, one of the things that I would like for you to reflect on is I mean, how do we assess, the role of the police in the July, civil unrest? I mean, were they deliberately absent in the early days in accordance with an allegiance to perhaps the former president, or were they simply inept? And once they did start mobilizing, what I started thinking about is, were their actions appropriate or perhaps lamentable? And I'm asking this just to connect with what Kate is saying in terms of, where we find ourselves as South African citizens and our relationship or trust relationships, specifically with institutions that are supposed to serve us, right? The South African Police Service, South African National Defense Force, for example, and we know played a huge role in the July unrest as well in terms of quelling the tensions there. But then also, again, in terms of like civic engagement, how do we assess the role of the police in these events?
We can see there's a bit of a tough one, really, because firstly, we just have a law enforcement that is not adequately equipped to deal with, urgent responses or to urgently respond to abrupt riots, for an example, right? There also was an element of a political motive, party political motive, or maybe the former president's impending imprisonment at the time was a trigger of all of this, because there were already people gathering and singing somewhere, and it does kind of incite reaction from other people. But what was found was that in certain instances, for example, in the Phoenix suburb, the police did not react as they would reasonably expect it to react, right? They did not react on time. It's hard to tell if it was because, it was because of racial reasons. And I think it's something that we can infer for ourselves when we look at the reports and all the data available to us. But I can't really say for sure that we know that the police were in allegiance to Zuma, or the police in the Phoenix were in support of the violence perpetrated by the Indian community. Yeah. But I think it's something that we can all look at and maybe, have objective opinions on that. But to go back to what Kate was saying, that there is a growing distrust in our leadership and in government institutions. It's happened starting from roads must fall, fees must fall. We remember what happened to students and the relationship, therefore, the relationship that was created between the students and the police during the fees must fall. The state used the police to be a buffer between the students and the institutions that the students were challenging to answer to the questions of free education, right? So it seems as if our Black government is doing to its citizens now what the apartheid government at some point did to them. Abahlali basemjondolo even say, I remember I saw a quote somewhere in an article that was written on the movement of the Abahlali basemjondolo movement. They refer to our Black leaders as Black colonialists, right? As the political leaders have internalized their historical oppressors' mode of thinking. So the methods of policing that our democratic dispensation adopted from the previous regime, it mirrors and mimics what the previous government was doing. So we are replicating it. We see police, even when you see the German Shepherd, you see a police dog, So even the leaders themselves, they only know that kind of policy, right? And it's going with what I was saying earlier, that we have our legal regime is born out of the oppressive regime. And what we've been trying to do is accommodate this equality we want to have in a legal regime that was designed not to have that. And that's why it's not working out.
Yeah.
Right? So our police, they police in the manner that they were policed during oppression.
Yeah.
And that's the understanding of policing that they have. And I think that is the problem.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Kate, perhaps to close with you, colleague, you know, I mean, as I was going through the South African Reconciliation Barometer, and I'm like, this is so beautifully captured. The work was done. I mean, even when you start reading the report, you guys go on to say, listen, we went through a vigorous process of finding people who are going to assist us to do this work and so on. These are the people who won this tender to carry out this work and all those things. And I was thinking, again, when you conduct research, you don't conduct research for the sake of conducting research and ticking boxes and all those things. And perhaps if you can just give us, just from your own experience as a researcher for all these years and some of the works you've done working with people in different sectors is, I mean, what do we do, Kate, in terms of, what is our role as civil society organizations, as researchers, as practitioners, government agencies and community leaders? How do we collaborate? How do we collaborate more effectively in terms of advancing reconciliation and then also just addressing the legacy of apartheid? And I think you mentioned some of things such as land, and collaboration. How do we hold hands with each other in the name of reconciliation, but yet still saying, let's not forget, right?
Yeah, thank you. Just as a parting note, I mean, I think the Institute more broadly does many different types of interventions at community levels and with different civil society organizations, universities, et cetera, and involved in conflict and peace building as well. From the point of view of the barometer, I mean, as you've mentioned, I'm a passionate researcher. I'm passionate about this data and this survey and the value that it has for all different types of organizations. There's actually very few surveys of this kind that are publicly accessible in South Africa. Even the research that's done by government or by HSRC, but the Reconciliation Barometer is available to the public, as is the Afrobarometer, which is our sister survey that works on democracy issues. And my goal is really to have that information and data as widely accessible and available. I would like everyone to use it, and we have worked with, for example, the Department of in the presidency on their 30-year review and their social cohesion reporting. We've worked with universities, political parties come to us, and I just see our role as really making that data available for everyone who needs to use it and who wants to use it for purposes of learning, education, advocacy, and so forth.
Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you to you as well, Sihle, for this panel engagement. And colleagues, we're going to leave it here for now in terms of this panel engagement, and move on to the other line items, just being considerate of time. But I can promise you that we do have space for Q&A and any clarity-seeking comments that you have. And I see already Zelda has matched us on and started engaging with us. So definitely do engage with us in terms of the chat, but we'll also make space for you colleagues to also engage again with us in terms of this panel, but then also the provocations as well that were raised earlier on by Professor Mbembe. Colleagues, in terms of our next line items with regards to our program is what are the initiatives that are in place currently in terms of highlighting anti-racism, combating anti-racism? There are colleagues in the space who are doing work, and we wanted to also be in conversation with them, right? And perhaps I want to start with Barend Legrange, who will be leading us in terms of this next line item. And Barend, is the Chief Operating Officer of the Privilege Foundation. And the foundation really just aims to look at after the interests of children, feeding the most vulnerable children's mind, soul, and stomach is what, they stand on. Barend, colleagues, was, also the Chief Operating Officer of the registered nonprofit organization South Africa Day from 2017 to 2021, really an initiative to promote nation building and a better future. And really the aim really is to inspire all people of the country to participate in building a better South Africa and creating new optimism rather for the future of the country. And the initiative creates the platform for citizens, business, and government to work together to achieve these goals. Also, Barend served as the Deputy CEO of CPGSA, Citizens in Partnership with Government from 2012 to 2017, and also served on the board of this non-governmental organization that formed a platform between government and citizens to help create better future for everyone in the country. Again, collaboration. He represented a CPGSA on the Committee of Human Rights Vulnerable Groups on combating racism and xenophobia. Furthermore, acted as convener of the CPG National Dialogue Forum for the Promotion of Nation Building, Social Cohesion and Reconciliation. Barend, welcome to this conversation. If perhaps you can take us through, in terms of some of the work that you've done in this space with regards to anti-racism initiatives. And again, perhaps, if you can also just give us, some of your own nuggets of wisdom in terms of, what initiatives can we take forward? What are some of these micro actions can we start working on wherever we are in our communities, just to make sure that we advance this work of anti-racism? Barend?
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation. And it's always a privilege to take part in such a very, very important discussion about racism, because we have a history of racism, and we build on an unfair system in South Africa, and our future certainly depends on how we are going to handle it also in the future. We're now in a new democracy for 30 years, but we still, millions of people in South Africa still suffer from the injustices of the past. And there's a lot of hard work. I traveled Africa many times, and I visited Rwanda the last 40 months on 6 occasions. And there's one word that stands out when you visit the genocide memorials in that country. And that's the word Kwibuka. Kwibuka, it means remember, unite, and renew. Now, our political system and that of Rwanda differs from each other. But the past, when we had elections in 1994, they had a genocide where almost 1 million people were killed in conflict. But that Kwibuka, I think that we can also take over from Rwanda. If we see what they have done over the last 30 years, and how they built up that country, how they unite, how those people united, and how they built up the country and renew. It's an example, a very good model also for South Africa to follow. And now in South Africa, we can never forget that Kwibuka part of remember. We must also keep it in mind. And I speak from a white perspective. I'm an Afrikaans-speaking white male person, certainly the most privileged person in the old system. But there's one thing that I will never forget, and I remember it every day, that I can't take that privileges that I had in the past and also remember that we still have it at the moment. We must never forget it. Therefore, there's a much greater responsibility on the Afrikaans white male person in South Africa. And that's also one of the reasons why I'm part of the Privilege Foundation, because to take that responsibility is not a burden. It's a privilege. It's a privilege because this is the one of the most beautiful countries, and with beautiful people in South Africa. And I want to see the future for everybody. And unfortunately, at this point in time, 30 years after democracy, so many people still suffer. You know, but that privilege that we have, we must utilize all opportunities to better and to increase the lives of all the people of South Africa. We can never forget, we must unite and they must renew. South Africa must be a better country for all its people. And that's so wonderful. I want to give you two examples of where there were racial conflict and how they solve that and they go on. You know, I think that in South Africa, we don't give ourselves enough credit for what we have achieved as far as that is concerned in our country, especially keeping in mind what so many people for decades and decades actually went through. And now after 30 years of democracy, we're still here. We are still here alive to tell the story. But we can't sit back. We have a responsibility, each and every one, and especially the people of my color, white. And you know, in 2017, there was in Kulini, and you will remember the death of that boy, was actually a lot of racial tension. It was the community of the Bulgang and also the informal settlement, Scotland there, against the Kulini, the traditional white area, town in the Northeast province. And there's a lot, that town actually burned, and the people, black against white, was in conflict. And so many people in South Africa thought that that would actually be the starting point of more racial tension right through South Africa. But what is so encouraging is that the two communities, the Tabulgang and the Kulini community, came together a few days after that conflict because they realized if they are not going to do something to create peace, they will go, this country will go up in flames. And therefore, we must get credit to the people of South Africa, that they came together and they immediately created a peace forum. And all of the political parties, actually, community leaders, business people, and community leaders came together and they created that peace forum. That was even the EFF and the Freedom Front and the ANC, all were presented there. And that is the time, about a week after that, that I also came involved with the peace process. But you know, there was a willingness of the people to say, listen, we can't allow this to go on, and we will have to do something about it. And that's when I was involved with South Africa Day. We started the project and encouraged all the people to start a project to see how we can improve the situation. And the people actually work very well together. And since that time, there's no time to elaborate on what actually happened there. But since 2017 up to now, there hasn't been one single racial incident again. The second one was in Senegal. And you remember 3 years ago with the murder of the Brendan Horner, that was thousands of people came together there. The black people, the white people. And again, there was the possibility that racial tension will go out of hand. But again, the community of Senegal and Matwabeng, they came together and they decided, listen, we can't allow this thing to escalate. There was a meeting where John Mooshley was part. John Mooshley is a pastor there, and then the ANC and the EFF and everybody had a meeting, as well as the farmers and the business people and the different churches and the faith community. They came together, and they also see for what can we do to defuse the situation. And that was actually a wonderful experience to be part of that. When we started a project there, with all the people there of the community, started the Senegal and Matloben Community Forum, and they decided that, listen, we are going to have projects to improve the position of the people of the region. We're not going to forget about the racial tension. We have our differences, we have a different history and different cultures and different customs and so forth. But they realize that, listen, it is so important that we come together and work towards a common goal. And those are the certain things they actually identified. What do we have all in common? You know, everybody needs clean water. We need good sanitation. We all want to send our children to good schools. We want a safe environment. Doesn't matter which political party you belong to or what faith your faith, what you believe. The thing is, everybody want to have a life with its food on the table. We want jobs. We want to live in a safe environment. And they started a project. They improved the situation in Senegal and Amatwabeng. It's all the groups, all the people of Senegal and Amatwabeng was working towards a common goal. And that's the way that they handled it. And it's so easy for us always to say things are not going well in South Africa. I think that the willingness of the people in South Africa to create a better South Africa for everybody in South Africa is there. We must just work towards that goal, and so that we have a better future for all in South Africa. We can't sit back. There's a lot of work to be done. There's people that don't have the privileges that I as personally had in the past, and we must work towards a better future for South Africa. See that everybody must have a better life. Now, in 5 years' time, in 20 years' time, the legacy of apartheid is not going to vanish. It's going to be hard work. We can't just blame the government. They've got a responsibility, and we are privileged to live in a democratic system. In 2.5 months' time, we are going to vote. But in the meantime, we as citizens of South Africa, as organizations, the business sector, everybody in South Africa must work so that people in this country have a better life. And for that, anti-racism is one of the core things that we must give attention to and work towards that kibuko, to say we must remember, we must unite, but we always also must renew this country of ours.
Thank you so much, Berend. My goodness me, you've raised unite and renew, and a better life for all. And, you know, reminding us that, you know, even when you're in a privileged position, you know, you can still work hand in hand with those who are not in that position. And again, I think, you know, the beauty of this conversation from, you know, when we started with Prof. Mbembe to the conversation, you know, led by Sihle and Kate is moving us there, right? And I think that's also what we're trying to map out in terms of these conversations, and, you know, to say, what is the work that is currently being done, you know? And I think when you highlight for us some of the phenomenal work that was done in Kulini, in Senegal, when communities, despite divisions, they say no, not in our name, right? Thank you for that, Berend. And colleagues, again, I hope you're taking notes, and you know, there will be an opportunity for Berend to engage us on any Q&As that you might have, or any clarity-seeking comments. But perhaps to move on to our next speaker, you know, when we talk about human rights, colleagues, we are reminded that we refer to them as the most basic attributes of humanity. And indeed, we know that the South African Constitution, in its very first clause, talks about the values that our state is founded upon, namely human dignity, equality, and human rights and freedoms. And one institution in this country that is leading certainly that work, a Chapter 9 institution, is the South African Human Rights Commission. And our next speaker, is leading that commission in terms of being a deputy chairperson, Ms. Fatima Chauhan, who holds a B.Proc degree from the University of the Witwatersrand, Johannesburg, and is an admitted attorney. She chaired various portfolio committees such as basic education, justice and constitutional development, and public enterprises. Ms. Chauhan served as a legal advisor in the Gauteng legislature and parliamentary representative on the Magistrates Commission, and also chairperson of the Western Cape Provincial Committee of the Magistrates Commission. In addition, Fatima has served as a member of the Judicial Services Commission in the duration 2009 and 2013, and currently heads up the equality focus area in the South African Human Rights Commission, as I indicated earlier on, as deputy chairperson. Fatima, perhaps if you can come in and take us through what colleagues in that Chapter 9 institution that you are leading with colleagues in that space, CIHLA, for example, are doing specifically as it relates to anti-racism initiatives. In this context, the SHINE initiatives that you guys are leading us through. Fatima?
Thank you so much for that elaborate introduction. Could I please just ask whether, in fact, there is the PowerPoint presentation? I also need to just connect my gadget to PowerPoint. If you just give me a moment, I've just got a note that the battery is running low. So there we go. Sorry about that. Just give me a moment. As luck would have it, we've now got load shedding. But I think we're good. We're good now. I'm good to go. Thank you so much. Yes, I just wanted to reflect on perhaps Baren's input as I begin my own input, which is really in effect to suggest that institutional transformation in relation to reconciliation, race relations, etc., is not enough, particularly in the South African context. And, I was engaged in another discussion a while ago where we were discussing reconciliation particularly, and the power of apologies, which is of course very important. But I made the point there that, even if the TRC was a resounding success, even if every perpetrator came, spoke the truth, and took advantage of the dispensation available to them, the fact of the matter is we would not have eradicated racism in South Africa. Racism was not only experienced by activists, leaders in the struggle, etc., who were either arrested, tortured, murdered, or both, but was experienced by ordinary people in everyday life. And people were ravaged by this system, yes, that was institutional, but deliberately supported and propelled by ordinary people who benefited from the system. And that didn't change in 1994. What changed was the institutional reforms and the transformation that was seen in the public sector. But in day-to-day lives, the effects of apartheid, the effects of racism were still very palpably with people. The attitudes that prevailed, the soft issues in the country were never dealt with. And this is really what my presentation is all about. And it's been something that we have been thinking about very much along the lines of Barent and his organization around how do we deal with these soft issues. And in order to do justice to that question, you know, I must confess that we were, and perhaps we can move to the first slide, whoever's controlling the PowerPoint, thank you so much. I must confess that we paused very much as a result of the unrest in July 2021. You spoke earlier about our investigating approach, but what perhaps many people do not know is that we also embarked on a process to try and deal with what we felt were prevailing circumstances, poverty, deprivation, oppression even, that existed in society that really enabled those instigators to set fire to a situation that was palpably explosive. And that we understood that the situation that pertained in KZN in regard to race relations, particularly class differences, and the apartness of people's lives from each other, was replicated all over South Africa. And so potentially that leaves us very vulnerable to a racial war in future. And so what we then did was we decided to, you know, that we didn't have all of the answers. We decided to start consulting. And in fact, as we did so, more questions rather than answers were prevalent. And so this consultation process led us to an 8-month-long consultative process with South Africans across the board. Next slide, please. And so a lot of what we're going to discuss today is a product of the viewpoints from a diversity of people in South Africa. And we've developed something called SHINE, which is in the next slide, please. This is the logo of SHINE. It's called the Social Harmony Through National Effort Program, which essentially, you will see in the logo itself, focuses on the self, the individual as an agent for change in the country. It is important, as Barent says, that you have to involve communities. You have to involve the people so that lasting solutions can be found. Solutions to many of our problems are to be found in the self, in changing personal habits, actions, doing violence, all of these cultures that we've pulled through from the apartheid era into our new democracy and our new reality have to be consciously attended to. Next slide, please. So what were people telling us? Well, I don't need to tell you. We've heard this afternoon, and I'm sure everybody would agree that as a young democracy, we are a work in progress. We are a product of our history, and I quite agree that history has to be taught in our schools. Our young people feel very alienated from the past, and they don't understand why. And this is why you'll find even young Black African people saying things like, you know, things were better under apartheid. They've never set foot in apartheid South Africa. And the reason they say things like this is not because they thought genuinely that things were better under apartheid, but because they didn't understand apartheid. But in addition to history, which has to be made, I believe, compulsory in our schools, there must also be deliberate diversity education so that we may understand the diversities that pertain and are able to negotiate it in a way that is comfortable, that is positive, and that is bonding in nature. Next slide, please. So what we were hearing from people in terms of solutions to our problem boils down to, in essence, the value, a value proposition that our destiny is bound together. I think you've heard Baron talking about this, that we are inextricably bound together and that we will rise together or we will fall together. And this notion is definitively found in the notion of Ubuntu, and something that we need to again revive in society. Next slide, please. So the question is, how do we do so? You may move on to the next slide. So there are 3 practical steps that Shine proposes, which are illustrated in the next slide, beginning with self-reflection. Next slide, please. So what is this all about? Essentially, what we're saying is that every single person in South Africa can participate in what is called the social harmony through national effort. It is a national effort with emphasis on action, and it requires very simple things from each of us. Firstly, we encourage people to engage in self-reflection practices. Very often our own contributions to disharmony in our lives, in our surroundings, in our homes. We have excessive levels of domestic violence, for example. We have excessive levels of substance abuse, alcohol dependencies in our country. These things all contribute to disharmony in ourselves, in our homes, and in our communities. So self-reflection helps us to identify those things in ourselves, and we are all a work in progress. There's never been a perfect human being. So we can all participate in self-reflection through various mechanisms, which we also have been working with partners to kind of hone in on some of these practices. So next slide will give you some sense of some strategies. So journaling, for example, especially amongst young people, helps to really gain insight into our patterns of behavior. Mindfulness throughout the day, maybe taking a moment to breathe through our stresses. We all have very stressful days at work, etc. Creating that mindfulness grounds us to be able to deal with these challenges that come our way, and that can potentially cause emotional and mental issues. And setting aside just for this, taking stock of your day, of your behavior, how are you as a human being, is a very, very important habit for most successful people. You read books on how to self-improve, etc. They all talk about this kind of strategy. Next slide, please. We can skip this slide. The second step of Shine, or second action, is to hold family meetings. Very importantly, the role of the family in maintaining healthy individuals and societies is vital. To too many South Africans, the home is not a sanctuary. You go to work, or you're out in school or university, and you come back and home is just dysfunctional. It's a source of stress. And we have to start mending and healing ourselves, but also our families. And you know, we take these instruments, these tools, these actions from our cultures in society, our traditions. In traditional African society, whenever there were challenges, people got together to dialogue through these challenges. And this is how they maintained strong tribes, strong clans, strong relationships with each other. And this is exactly what family meetings do. And these are on this slide some strategies that we take to communities and to schools and to different gatherings of people. Next slide, please. And the third and final step of SHINE is to encourage diversity education. Diversity education, both formal and informal. There are not many platforms where South Africans gather in their diversity, where we can really engage at a human level with each other about our differences, about our practices, about our lived realities, about our past. I was just speaking to, we were testing some of these actions within the organization, South African Human Rights Commission, last year. And I was speaking earlier to our Mpumalanga office manager, who said to me that, you know, what we did was we took time off and we shared our stories. And I spoke about how my mother was a domestic worker, and she worked quite far away from the home. And we would only go to sleep with a meal if she brought home the leftovers from the kitchen. However, there were days where the bus broke down, or when you know, she finished off late and missed the bus, and we would sleep without food in the house. And I shared this story with my staff members, and suddenly everybody felt open to share their own experiences. And today we are a different team of people than we were last year this time, because this experience of sharing our stories in the workplace has led us to become a family, not just colleagues. So much so that one of our colleagues we lost sadly a few months back, her family actually comes into the office from time to time to check up on all of us, because we have become an extended family. We practice sharing our stories on an ongoing basis. So these human relationships that are crafted through our diversities in the workplace is something we believe that can be replicated throughout the length and breadth of South Africa, from your tiger brands to your local, you know, small spaza shop type of situation, to domestic workers working in people's homes. When did we ever see a nation acting together in concert, sharing the stories and developing actively conscious human bonds, so that we can heal ourselves as a consequence of our very traumatic past? These are some of the things we think that as the national effort we can achieve in South Africa. There are a few other slides, perhaps we can just quickly go through them. So again, this is a strategy for sharing our stories, which is the third action of SHINE. Next slide. No one gets left behind in this national effort. Next slide. So everyone is a potential partner in SHINE, including the Amit Kathrada Foundation and every other organization on this platform and beyond. And we have a SHINE pledge available on our website. We have various tools that we can share with you freely. The logo will be shared with you if you so wish. But even if you are not an organization, but just an individual, by participating in these three actions, signing the SHINE pledge, you are recorded as part of the national effort. Next slide. So, as I said, we will be there to support anybody who wants to partner with us very actively on SHINE. And we have tested a lot of modules and we can share these with you. But we also have wonderful toolkits such as banners. We even have a SHINE song, podcasts, etc., that we would be happy to share. Thank you so much for your time and the opportunity, Moeketsi.
Thank you, Fatima. Thank you very much. I certainly volunteer myself in terms of singing. You know, yeah, happy to provide leadership in that space, colleagues. But you know, Fatima, some of these action steps that you've raised particularly around, self-reflection, journaling, mindfulness, and, setting aside time, as you were going through the presentation, it really reminded me again of even what I had raised earlier on as I got into the panel discussion with Sihle and Kate about, again, how do we, center, people's narratives, right? And I think even, what Berend was also highlighting for us is also what happens again when communities certainly, not only hold family meetings, but community meetings, right? And really just part of that work of encouraging diversity education. Thank you very much, Fatima and colleagues doing this important work in the South African Human Rights Commission. Colleagues, the last colleague that would like to, okay. I've just been made aware, so we're supposed to have an engagement with one of our colleagues as well, another anti-racism initiative, that is being led by the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. And again, part of, how we structured this program led by Retabile was we really wanted a collaborative approach, right? Not only in terms of civil society, but of course, Chapter 9 institutions, government, research practitioners, and people leading in this space. We wanted to talk about, the National Action Plan, to combat racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. But given that the colleagues from that space are having technical issues, we will move on also for the sake of time and, get us, and now colleagues, a lot has been said. A lot has been said in this conversation, from the provocations that, Professor Bembe, highlighted for us, what Sihle and Kate took us through in terms of these reports that have been, released, informed by data, informed by lived experience. And then also, of course, what we were taken through by Berend, in terms of the work that he's done with the Privilege Foundation and working with communities and, showing us that it is possible, right? Oftentimes, we say, no, it's not possible to go into this community, it is volatile and so on. But again, what Berend was highlighting for us is how communities in themselves can, in fact, surprise us and say, but no, we can do this work, difficult as it is, in terms of, anti-racism work, right? But now, colleagues, it is our time to really engage in terms of what came out and, what was shared by the colleagues thus far. But also, even if the colleagues who were also facilitating and sharing have questions for each other, because I think what I also, as Fatima was also just taking us through the Shine project, she was also making linkages to what was raised by Barrett, right? So I'm also going to encourage even, Professor Mbembe, Kate and Sihle and Barrett, and of course, Fatima, if you also want to have, raise questions, provide clarities, or if there were certain things that were not clear for you, I think this would be a great time and space for us to do that. If you can just raise your hand, if you're not able to raise your hand, just unmute yourself and we engage constructively so, and as we map a way forward in terms of this work that we need to do in terms of anti-racism. Colleagues? Professor Mbembe, are there any provocations you'd like to raise for us in terms of what you have heard, and even from what you also, shared? I mean, certainly as a scholar who, whose work really engages in subjects such as, post-modernity, statehood, violence, death, slavery, capital, sexuality, urbanity, and political economics of brutalized, of brutality rather, imagined and, objectified by race, racism, and colonialism, What's coming out for you, Professor Mbembe, if I can put you on the spot there? Professor Mbembe, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you, but the Zoom is telling me that I can't start the video because the host has stopped it.
So our team is on this call, and I'm just going to kindly ask the technical team to please sort that out for us. But perhaps you can go ahead, and then we can just listen to your audio whilst the technical team is sorting us out. Professor Mbembe.
No, thanks so much. Thanks, Moketsi. As I was saying on the chat, I found all the presentations extremely illuminating. If there's one thing that they highlight, it's the fact that the fight against racism is still of a matter of urgent obligation and actuality. And the examples we heard all show the extent to which this struggle against racism is anchored in the everyday. That it begins in the quotidian, in the very localities where we live and exercise our lives. Something was also striking in what I heard. It's the connection between anti-racism and other forms of engagements to improve the most vulnerable people's lives. Whether one is dealing with gender-based violence, or whether one is trying to address matters concerning very material needs of housing, of food, of education, of access to healthcare, or for that matter, the many forms of inequalities which are still structuring our society. I also heard, and I'll stop there, a deep yearning for a deeper and meaningful forms of encounters beyond our individual identities and experiences. And that's how we will build social cohesion. And I think, of course, we can learn from a lot of what is going on elsewhere, but I really believe that there is also a lot South Africa can offer in the global dialogue on this matter. And sometimes we have been rather shy, and I think we could speak a bit more about where it is that we have made headways. Because it's not true that elsewhere things are so brilliant. So those are 3 lessons I take from otherwise really powerful reflections delivered by colleagues. So I would like to thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you very much, Professor Mbembe. Colleagues, I'll allow one more contribution. If you can just please do contribute. I do note that there is a participant who And again, I'm also going to put him on the spot. Sean Mavundla, you've been with us since we began. What's coming out for you, if you're comfortable, to also just switch on your video. Apologies for putting you on the spot, but from these provocations that have been raised from our speakers and facilitators, any questions, comments, Sean? I see Sean is still, we'll take it that Sean is experiencing technical glitches there. Kate, are there any, last words from yourself, colleague, given the presentations thus far, in addition to, our own panel, but also what's been shared by Berend and Fatima?
Thank you. I think really what stood out for me is hearing about the really practical and interesting and innovative ways that people are putting this work into action, and that continues to be a really important priority. And so, yeah, it stayed with me, and certainly I hope to be involved and continue and begin building relationships with these various kinds of important initiatives. So thanks for the presentations and for the session as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kate. Colleagues, I'm going to close it here, and just really wanting to, thank everyone who really made this possible, from the colleagues who engaged, who presented on the different initiatives, to Professor Mbembe in terms of what he raised with regards to his provocations, and of course, Sihle and Fatima from the South African Human Rights Commission. But also, colleagues, I do want to, point out that this conversation really would not have been possible, without the brilliant, Ms. Retabile Ratsomo, who is, of course, the program manager of the anti-racism program here at the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, looking to deepen non-racialism in South Africa and, of course, beyond. And as you would all know, she's also the convener of the Anti-Racism Network South Africa, which has a membership of over 80 South African-based organizations. And we'd like to thank those organizations as well who are part of this important network. And, as someone who is a BA LLB graduate from the lovely and robust Rhodes University, and someone that I know has a passion for the advancement of all human rights in South Africa, this conversation certainly would not have been possible without her. And she is really the embodiment that, indeed, we are not the product of what, they say about us, that we are bigger, that we are greater, and that we are mightier. And, she constantly reminds us here, even at the foundation, that we should continue to be ourselves, even when it's tough, and that we should push through, and that indeed time reveals everything. And I think just from this, this conversation has been so important to have. So thank you, Retabile, the technical team that has also been led by the brilliant Zusiphe Baki, our communications manager, and really the administrative team here at the foundation, but then also the administrative team as well from all the different organizations who've joined us today, the IRJ, the South African Human Rights Commission, colleagues from the Privileged Foundation, the ones that we've been communicating with. Again, even the admin team, Assistant Professor Mbembe, we thank you as well, really, for making this possible. I see that Sean says that the technical glitches are sorted, but Sean, I am wrapping up. But again, in the spirit of democracy and 30 years of democracy, I will certainly allow you to have the last word, and then we will close this conversation. Sean?
Hi, am I audible?
You are audible, Sean.
Okay, thank you so much, Moeketsi. I'd also like to thank each and every panelist for such informative and interesting presentations. Due to time constraints, I'd just like to make 2 points before handing over to you to close. Firstly, the point that I want to make actually links to what you and Sife said, where you actually questioned in terms of your criticism of the report and how it actually failed to get to the core of people's problems. And
Sean, we have lost you there. I'm not sure if you can still hear us. I think it's safe to say that perhaps
it's easy, especially current.
Sean, you can continue.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I was just saying that it's easy, especially when looking at what is going on in the country now with protests, student protests, worker protests. So it's easy to condemn the violence and everything, but then we also need to ask the questions, what is it that motivates this kind of violence? Because people do not randomly wake up and decide to destroy property and decide to take to the streets and litter and all these kinds of things. So firstly, we need to also address the underlying issues that motivate this violence. It could be inequality, it could be poverty, it could be incompetence, and it also could be negligence. So until we deal with these socio-economic issues, we will still be left with instances of this kind of violence for generations to come. And also just to link to the point that Sihle made. Actually, she made quite a number of fascinating points. But I'd also like to extend on the point of internal attitudes. There, I would like to put each and every one of us on the spot in terms of saying that we all have work to do within ourselves and in our immediate spaces. And one of the things that I always highlight is that no one is a finished product. Even me, myself, with all this knowledge on racism and everything, I still observe myself that when we are in a room engaged in these kinds of debates, there are certain policing in terms of what I think is allowed to be said and what I think is not allowed to be said. And just to make a quick, short example, one of the things that is a heated topic in this country is on land. And you find that most of us struggle to say the simple thing whereby we hide behind euphemisms and say land dispossession and things like that. Whereas the truth is that land was stolen from Black people, and it's white people who stole land. That is not to induce any kind of guilt on white people, but rather to say that that is the actual truth. And only once we start telling the truth can we then come together meaningfully to sort of like create interventions or design ways forward in terms of how can we then, in meaningful and substantive ways, reconcile as a country. Thank you so much again, Mogeti, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Sean, for your reflections and those very important questions that you raise. And really, that is the reason why we had this conversation on examining rather, reconciliation in the state of reconciliation democracy, particularly as we find ourselves 30 years into this democracy of ours. And, perhaps to close, there's a writer by the name of Horata Chengata, and, she talks about revolutions that hold, and she reminds us that it's so easy, as we see, for empire to spit out knockoffs, for it to imitate resistances and brand these freedom. It's so easy, as we know, to be flooded with commemorations, their roots so obfuscated, we end up toasting to bloodshed. And even when the cracks show, when news of murdered women become daily bread, we are still spoon-fed cis men in heels and first ladies cycling against violence. We are subjected to road shows and all manners of performance, then forced to clap as if we haven't heard it all before. Words like scourge and epidemic are strewn around as if the confetti could distract us, as if this disguises the unchanged writing on the wall. Even the word nightmare loses its texture on the tongue as the boundary separating it from reality crumbles. And yet, I still have the nerve to dream in desperation of revolutions that hold, of movements that grow gargantuan roots, destroying any thread of dilution in their path. I dream of movements as strong as concentrate and of stubborn histories that show up uninvited. I dream of movements that haunt democracies and demand receipts. I dream of collectives that pierce falsehoods and evoke suffocating legacies. I dream of movements with gargantuan roots, ones that keep a firm chokehold on time. Colleagues, on that note, I would like to thank you all the speakers, all the administrative staff that made this possible. Thank you for your meditations, your provocations. And again, this work will not be done by all of us in our little islands. It's through co-creation, collaboration, and working together that we're going to achieve this, South Africa that we all aspire to. What is this next 30 years going to look like, right? What is this new story that we're going to tell our children, our grandchildren, right? Thank you very much. I'm going to close off this session. May you have yourselves a wonderful evening, a safe evening with your loved ones, with your family. And as Fatima reminds us, perhaps today, for those of you who haven't, let's start thinking of holding those family meetings so that we can start these important conversations. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank